You're listening to the Future of Convenience podcast, featuring senior retail executives and experts in the global convenience and mobility industry.
Well, welcome to the Future of Convenience podcast. I'm Dan Mundford, and I'm joined by my co-host today, Anthony Wysome.
Hi, Dan.
Good to see you again, Anthony. Well, look, we normally spend a lot of time together planning and delivering Insights AI Roundtable. It's always fun, isn't it? But today we're broadcasting on as a podcast on a topic we covered on the roundtable quite recently, didn't we, Anthony? Which is, I think it was a cracker. I think it was one of the most interesting episodes, and it's a very hot live issue, and that is self-checkout loss prevention. Anthony, do you want to tell us a bit more about that and also introduce our guest today?
Yeah, for sure. As you say, it was a great session, Dan. And as you know, as I think some of people will already know, we have a quarterly roundtable where we are looking all the time at the key areas for AI deployment. And yeah, over the last 6-9 months, there's no doubt that perhaps the hottest of all of the issues has been loss prevention and the associated questions that surround it when it comes to shrink, safety, labour cost, and so on. So yeah, I'm absolutely delighted that today we're joined by Matt Redwood, VP of Retail Technology Solutions at Diebold Nixdorf, who are involved in some of the really exciting work that we had shared at the roundtable and are beginning to see enormous improvements in this area.
Before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to talk to you about one of our sponsors, Noah's. The iPhone moment for service stations is here. You're losing food sales to restaurants and delivery apps. Well, Noah's flips the script. They install high-quality food units inside your store. No chefs, no extra staff, no major capital investment. Just proven technology, smart kitchens, and digital brands people actually want. Noah's connects your store to delivery platforms, your own app, kiosks, and even TikTok if you want. It's plug and play. And it works. Noah's, where convenience competes with restaurants. Learn more at noahs.global.
Great. So welcome, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Good to see you guys again, and thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you guys.
No, not at all. Let's get straight in then. As you say, Matt, I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I think in common with you and probably Dan as well, we've all got our own love-hate relationship with self-checkouts, both as customers and providers over the last decade or more. So let's start there, Matt. I mean, just give us a bit of background on yourself and where you come in this world.
Absolutely. So I've pretty much spent my entire career working in the self-service industry. Started off at a solution provider in the business consulting role, really working with retailers at a time when self-service was starting to develop. It was just a kind of emerging technology, and work very much with retailers on what does this new technology mean? What can it deliver for the retailer? And how do you operationalize it out there in the store? And it's kind of snowballed over the last, I don't know how many years now, to the point now where at DN, I run the self-service business, the POS business. So basically all of our front-end technology, and then more latterly our AI business, which I think we're going to talk quite a bit more about in the next couple of minutes.
Very, very good. Now, Matt, let's sort of frame this. Can you give us a bit of the market context in terms of, I guess the tension between shoppers who are always looking for convenience and their actual experience, and also on the other side, we've talked about the theft problem. What's the scale of that, and what do we need to do out there?
Sure. So obviously, and I can't quite believe this myself now, self-service has been around for nearly 25 years or 25 years that it's been out there, which is really interesting because it's interesting to look at the adoption rates over that 25 years, and it really demonstrates just how long it takes to really bed new technology into the retail environment. And there's always been this, let's say, healthy tension, right? If you're removing the serving element of attendant to customer and replacing that with technology, it's really important that you operationalize that technology in the right way. And if I think back to the early days of self-service, it was really rudimentary. There was one type, And really, the only question a retailer has to ask themselves is how many pods should I remove and how many self-service should I put in? And retailers is a small margin business, and they quickly realized that there were massive gains to be made in this space, but they almost pushed it too far from an operational perspective. And what we saw in the early days was retailers really taking far too much labor out of the front end. And that brought this seesaw effect in, that a lack of labor or too little labor then actually started to detract from the consumer experience. And that's when the great kind of rebalancing kind of happened, where retailers really looked at self-service not as a point-of-sale device, but actually as a business change technology that needed operationalizing in the right way. And if you didn't operationalize it in the right way, it was a pretty poor consumer experience. Staff weren't happy, consumers weren't happy. It didn't really deliver against any of the metrics that we were hoping. And we kind of got to this medium where retailers realized they could redistribute labor to other areas of the store. It wasn't just about removing the labor. And I think now we're now in probably the third or fourth refresh cycle for some retailers. They've been through four iterations of the technology. It's really interesting to see how the mentality has changed towards the technology amongst consumers, but also the mentality amongst retailers. Consumers now expect it in many environments and actually sometimes demand it. If you can find particularly a grocery retail store which doesn't have self-service today, and there's generally queues in that store because there's not enough attendance to run the front end, and therefore they got tills that are off, and consumers get really frustrated by queuing because they're done with their shopping at that stage and they want to get through the front end and they want to get out the store. But what's really interesting now with the retailer approach of how they're tackling self-service is it's not POS versus self-service versus mobile self-scanning. It's what is the right front-end technology mix for my consumers and the different types of consumers. And what's really interesting now is retailers are starting to put 3, 4, even 5 different technology types across their front end, really focused on different consumer types who all have slightly different needs. Obviously, far ends of the spectrum, but if you're popping in at a lunchtime to buy a meal deal, it's 3 items. That's a very different expectation of experience versus someone that's coming with a trolley or a cart and is buying 100 items. Might be the same consumer shopping at different times or different formats, but the requirements are very different. So it's really nice to really see that retailers are putting the different consumers at the center of their decision making, both in terms of technology and operations. Obviously, the shrink piece has changed things dramatically as well. And as a solution provider, we're always trying to stay, I guess, ahead of market demands, particularly from a technology perspective. The shrink one has been the biggest change we've seen, particularly since COVID. And I guess the magnitude of that is that some retailers are losing up to 4% of their revenue to theft, which, when you consider how much retailers turn over, that is an absolutely massive number.
So, I mean, Anthony, just to bring in some of your own experience before we sort of look at some of the solutions to this, you've got a bit of a background in this area as well, haven't you?
Yeah, certainly. The interesting thing for me is going back to my days, particularly working in the UK supermarket industry, where we were putting this technology in. I think firstly, it'd be interesting to get your take on, as you say, over that 20-25 year period, not only has it become normal, but I know that when I was introducing self-checkouts, the test for consumer adoption was whether we could get customer satisfaction with the self-checkouts to a level which was at least as high as for any other traditional solution. I'm guessing that's pretty much the case these days, or at least in terms of nearly all customers have a clear preference and an expectation.
Yeah, absolutely. And the measuring the customer experience is absolutely the one measure that everyone should be focused on, right? You can measure revenue, you can measure loss, all quantifiable metrics. But ultimately, if the consumer's not happy and they've not had a good experience, they're not going to come back to that store. And that has a cascade effect for that particular for that particular business and that particular store. So customer satisfaction levels should absolutely be at the center, regardless of what the technology is. And we should all be striving that we continue to improve customer satisfaction, because expectations continue to rise. It's a metric that the expectations continue to increase, and therefore we need to find new ways to try and meet those expectations.
Quite. Now, I am a satisfied self-checkout customer. I very happy being so. I generally don't nick things either, and I think I'm still in the majority there. But actually, that is the question, isn't it? So we, as I said, self-checkout has become a part of our lives, but clearly, as you were saying, post-COVID and increasingly in some markets, just the amount of shrink has become too high to bear.
Yes.
This is not you've been looking at this for quite some time. It'd be really interesting just to, because we covered it in our roundtable, really interesting just to hear the backstory as to where you guys picked this one up and how you've sort of worked and collaborated to bring through solutions.
Sure. So as you say, this has been a long journey for us. We've been working on AI at checkout for a little over 4 years now. And it's no secret, we're very honest with the fact that we originally started this journey that we wanted to solve friction at checkout. And we get reams and reams of data come back from the solutions that we've got live. I think we've got 160,000 self-service checkouts live now. So we get a lot of data back, and we sat down and we analyzed that data to understand where were the key friction points during the transaction that would be detractors from the consumer experience. And there were some fairly quick wins, things like, can we improve the intuitiveness of the GUI, make the workflow quicker, make the solutions easier to use, add more accessibility features for anyone that had an impairment. And then there was a bunch of things that came out of the process. And there was this interesting dynamic between technology, member of staff, and the consumer, and the interaction between those three. And if you think about, the old adage, which I'm thankful has kind of disappeared now, the unexpected item in the bagging area that seemed to be synonymous with self-service, really what we were saying there was an unnecessary intervention that was being caused by the security scale. So we really looked at all of that data to kind of understand where we should be focusing and prioritizing to try and apply innovation on top. And there were some areas that were very obvious, like age-restricted items caused 22% of interventions. Therefore, trying to solve that would have been a key driver. Some of the customer satisfaction feedback we got was that non-barcoded items were really cumbersome to process because you had to thumb through that catalog to try and find it. And then obviously the shrink topic came up. And we originally went out to try and find point solutions to solve some of these problems. And we approached, I think, over 15 different AI companies. But what we quickly realized were there was a lot of variability in terms of the maturity of AI. Some people weren't actually really even using AI. There was a lot of people that professed to have the silver bullet to solve retail, and I don't think they'd really thought about how to operationalize the technology. But more so as a solution provider, we couldn't afford, from a complexity perspective, to have 5, 10, 15 different solutions plugged in, particularly that were all really underpinned by the same technology, i.e. computer vision AI, because it really was a duplication of the business logic. So we went back out to market to try and find a more scalable approach. And we found our now partner, SeaChange, who had a very mature platform, AI platform, and didn't really have a kind of an application for it within retail. They'd approached retailers directly before they kind of got in touch with us. And then we set out on this journey to build the applications to try and solve some of these friction points. And it started off slow. We did age verification and then item recognition and then shrink. We really wanted to do something a little bit more advanced than just using camera-based technology. So we used a combination of behavioral analysis, process tracking, and item recognition deeply integrated into the self-service device so that we could then triangulate what the camera and the AI was seeing with what was being scanned, what was being touched on the screen, the area of the transaction that the consumer was in, what was being put on the security scale. So we could kind of triangulate all of these data points together to be much more accurate. And I'm pleased to say now we're working with over 60 customers globally on deploying the technology, and it's really kind of taken off in terms of how much we're now involved in the loss side of retail business, which generally we didn't get involved with before. We were kind of more focused on front end operations and technology. So it's been a real learning curve, and it's one that I'm sure is going to continue for many years to come.
I completely, based upon, as I said, the work we saw at the roundtable, the way that the solution demonstrates, and the number of different use cases that it's been able to pick up. I think everyone was just fascinated and incredibly pleased to see that kind of solution coming through. Can you tell us a little bit, because as you say, you're working with a lot of retailers, and you have now conducted live trials in Europe. Just tell us a little bit about particularly how both customers and staff in those experiences are playing back
Sure.
their response to those solutions.
So one thing to note that we wanted to get right was the identification of shrink is one hurdle that you need to get over from a technology perspective. But the question that we really asked ourselves all the way through this process was so what? If you've identified a shrink instance, so what? What are you going to do next? And what we were keen to do was to create a solution that didn't just identify shrink. It's a great reporting tool for a retailer. You're losing loads of money. We wanted to create something that really helped retailers to eradicate shrink from their environment. So we really focused on, well, what is that so what element of the technology? And that really came down to how do we in a realistic way stop shrink from happening when it's identified without completely pissing off the consumer or treating them like a criminal and they're guilty until proven innocent. And on the flip side, without raising a huge amount of interventions that required attendance, time, and potentially putting that attendance into harm's way. So we really spent a lot of time looking at the different use cases, the different types of theft, and then creating what we call a rule engine. And the rule engine effectively allows the retailer to configure exactly what happens as an output every time a shrink use case is identified. And we have a very scalable output. We start with what we call nudges, and the nudges are there and designed to really do exactly that, nudge the consumer back into the right behavior. And the reason why we want to do that is that we found that a large portion of theft was non-malicious. It was people that had genuinely made a mistake. They were a bit stressed. They were in a rush. Their children were hanging off them, and they'd made a genuine mistake. And we didn't want to alienate that consumer. So we used the nudging to really just push the customer that actually they've forgotten something, or they need to do something different, or they need to do something again, and to get them to self-rectify. And I'm pleased to say that over 85% of consumers self-rectify, which is great because it then means no further intervention or escalation needs to happen. And it means that shrink has been stopped right there and then. Obviously, if you're a malicious thief, and I say malicious in the form that I'm deliberately trying to trick the system and I'm out to try and steal, we then have a level of escalation. And that level of escalation is designed that the retailer can choose their escalation path based on what they feel comfortable operating in their stores. A lot of retailers do not want members of staff to intervene in potentially a very hostile situation. Some have central security operation centers who are monitoring stores, and they're actually collecting footage to look for repeat offenders. And other retailers have security, and they want that security to step in. So what we created was an escalation path that allowed the retailers to choose what would happen. So if I'm stealing and I'm maliciously trying to steal, I've been nudged. Please scan that item again. And I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to carry on with the transaction. I'm now flagged. So if another instance happens, or even that first instance, what we can do is we can escalate up the chain. So the next level might be that we actually block the the transaction. So that's an intervention that requires a member of staff to come over and intervene. And what we can do, so that we are empowering store staff as much as possible, is we have wearable technology in phones, tablets. We're completely agnostic. The member of staff gets the intervention. There's an intervention alert, and it's lane 4. But they can also watch the video clip. So they can see the 5 or second video clip of what's happened before they go and approach that consumer. And we spend a lot of time actually training the store staff in terms of the body language and the audio language that they use to approach that consumer, so that they can dispel the situation, they can deal with it, and do it in a safe way. But if the retailer doesn't want to have that member of staff involved, they can send that to a security team within the store. They can intervene, or it can go to their central operations. And that really has made us or enabled us to develop and deliver an operational solution that really works for the retailer. It doesn't slow the transaction down, it actually speeds it up. It reduces the amount of attendant time needed to run the store. And some of the staff feedback has been this technology is fantastic because it's made our life less stressful. We've got more time to do our job, but critically, we've got more time to interact with the consumer and deliver that personal service that a lot of people want at the checkout. And then from a consumer's perspective, it's interesting. Some people don't notice that the technology is there, which is great validation that it's working well. And some recognize it, but they recognize that it's actually made the experience quicker and easier for them at checkout. So it's fascinating, and it's evolving every day, and every deployment is slightly differently, but it seems to tick the box for the consumers and the store staff, while also stopping shrink. And we've managed to solve over 70% of shrink for particular retailers at their self-service checkout, which has been a great success.
So just in these last few minutes, then maybe there's almost 2 questions we could just pick up on, actually. One would be just in terms of specifically, as you say, solving the problem, which as we've witnessed, this technology very much begins to do. How fast do you see this evolving now? What would you expect to see in terms of a sort of pace of deployment of these kind of solutions from here on? And then maybe beyond that, if we may just have a couple of minutes on, as we've done, some of the fascinating conversations around where you go beyond solving this specific problem with this technology. Because as a frustrated store designer, I can see endless possibilities.
Absolutely.
Let's go back to that first one. So how quickly is everyone going to run at this?
I think we're going to see an exponential explosion of this technology across particularly grocery retail initially. As I said, it's been 4 years in the making, but it's not until you really put the technology into a live environment and start to develop it in that environment that you start to see the benefit and how well it works. But if you consider that some retailers are losing, let's say, €1,400 per checkout lane per month, and we can solve 75% of that, there's obviously some gravitas to the business cases associated with the technology. But when you look at the let's say the softer benefits that it drives, better consumer experience, faster transaction time, less interventions, less staff hours needed at checkout, it really delivers on all of the key metrics, which is how do I make the consumer experience better, and how do I make the attendant experience better as well. So my prediction is we're going to see an absolute explosion of this technology. We're in conversation with 5 or 6 retailers that are looking to start rolling out the technology across their entire estate this year. And as I said, we're working with a lot of retailers globally on this kind of technology. So I think this will become commonplace, particularly at self-service, hopefully also at attendant POS, very, very quickly in the grocery space. It will then be how quickly can we then develop the models for the other retail verticals that are also feeling this pain, like fashion, general merchandise, QSR. Theft doesn't, is not related to grocery alone. It exists everywhere, and ultimately this technology works, and we want to get it out there as quickly as possible, so retailers can start using it.
And once we've cracked that one, where are we going to end up here? Because actually, as you say, this just in terms of a little sort of nod to a future podcast in 2 years' time when we come back with that one.
Yep.
What are we going to be thinking about then?
So I think short to midterm, and I'll stick with the shrink topic. What's been really interesting in this journey is a lot of retailers understand their top level metrics in terms of the amount of shrink that they have, but don't necessarily know where it's coming from or how that shift moves around the store. So if we can solve on the larger part shrink at self-service, we're already getting requests, and we've already started developing the technology to say, well, actually, can we deploy that on our attendant tills as well? And that's not to say that store staff are stealing, that's consumers as well as store staff potentially making mistakes. And then actually into aisles. And I think this is going to be a bit of a whack-a-mole situation, that if we solve it here, it will solve a certain amount, but that malicious theft will always go to the area of the store where it's easiest to steal. So we are also developing an in-aisle and aisle to checkout solution that will allow retailers to really actually see and prevent theft, not just at the front end, but all the way through the store as well. The complexities of that then get tenfold, because if you're stealing an aisle, you've got potentially 5 or 6 exit points from that store. You could just walk straight out the front door. You could walk straight out the exit. Maybe even go out a fire escape. You could go through an attendant till or a self-service checkout and pretend to be an honest customer and buy some cheaper goods, knowing that you've got 3 bottles of wine in your bag. Or you could walk through the checkout area, pretend to pay or pretend to process your goods and then leave. So that throws up much greater complexity in terms of how you intervene, where you intervene, and ultimately how you stop those products walking out the store without them being paid. I think what's really interesting in this space of AI within bricks and mortar retail is most retailers are looking at AI all the way across their store environment. I've seen some interesting solutions that monitor the health and the temperature of fridges, to health and safety solutions, to out of stock solutions, to heat mapping, even AI that tracks your eyeballs to look at where you're looking, to look at product placement, even commercialization of products. How many times was a product picked up, looked at, and then not bought, to flag is there a problem with that product? Is it nutritional or pricing or branding or promotion? And therefore the retailer needs to make a change to their product line. So there really does, sky's the limit in terms of where this could go. And it's really exciting to see all of these different solutions will start emerging in the retail environment. And I think the retailers that do it well, or the suppliers that do it well, will be the ones that plug all of these together, because there's so much data that comes off each of these point solutions. And it's fine in a kind of an isolated bucket, but actually the real value is plugging this data together and triangulating some of this data for use, whether it's operations or whether it's technology or service or product, triangulating all this data together and then taking actionable outputs off the back of it is going to be where the real value, I think, is driven, and not necessarily just from the point solution itself.
Well, I think it's fair to say, Matt, after 25 years of self-checkout, we've finally begun to get under the surface of it. This is going to be an amazing few years, I think, as these technologies evolve. There's no doubt that all of our clients just can't wait to get involved in making this happen. And as we all, I think that this is, as you say, the sky's the limit. This is just the beginning. Absolutely. So, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great to hear about it. As I said, there's no hotter subject, and that was a brilliant illumination of some of the biggest progress we've seen in the industry in recent years.
Great. Well, thank you for having me.
Very, very good. And Anthony, thank you very much for joining me and really just repeating the conversation that you and Matt had on the our AI roundtable, which was fascinating to listen to then and fascinating today. And Matt, really appreciate you sharing all that with us. And we'll watch to see what happens very closely, and we can see it's going to happen very quickly. Thank you, everybody, for listening to Future of Convenience podcast. Look forward to the next time. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Future of Convenience podcast, produced by Dan Mundford, Nick Scherzer, Jenna Ferguson, and Lorraine Evans. It is produced and edited and mixed by Carolyn Schneer, and music is provided by Jukebox Music. Learn more at globalconvenience.com.